Great. Well, welcome again, everyone. Really happy to have you all today at a second meeting of our PCFO policy webinar series. We're going to continue to do these for PCFO communities and share this information out, especially as we continue to grow this campaign and have this resource available for lots of folks that are interested in pursuing local clean energy policy and making the commitments that can really build a clean energy economy for Ohio. So we are joined today by Andrew Conley, who is going to share with us, with Clean Fuels Ohio, who's going to share with us some great information around EV infrastructure and how to think through charging stations for your communities. But before we get started, I want to just make a couple quick announcements for Power Clean Future Ohio. The first one is that on May 20th, we'll host the Ohio Clean Energy Summit, Local Communities Lead. That's going to be a virtual summit. We were planning to have a great summit last year on April 30th in person in Cincinnati. This one will be hosted virtually from Cincinnati. So Tom, I see you on here. Hopefully we can highlight some of the great work you're doing in Silverton, as the community down there is hosting virtually at least this summit, and obviously want to continue to host this great event in the years ahead as well. And hopefully we'll be able to highlight other communities across Ohio and their leadership. So look out for more information on that. We'll also be asking cities to commit to the Ohio 30 by 30 pledge. We're asking elected officials to sign on to that, city staff if they would like to sign on to that as well, to show that they really support their city reducing emissions. The second thing that I want to point to is that we've brought on a new person to be our campaigns director. So Mark Gavin is joining us today. I'll let him just say hello here in a second, but Mark is going to be leading our effort to work with communities all across the state to help them on community choice aggregation. It's an incredible tool for communities to use to be able to reduce their emissions and to adopt clean energy. And Mark, as an expert on campaigns, it can really help communities get it across the finish line and think through what their options are in adopting clean energy contracts. So I want to make that quick announcement. Mark, I don't know if you want to say hello or share anything on your background.
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Mark Gavin Sr. I'm originally from Warren, Ohio, up in Northeast Ohio, about 15-20 minutes north of Youngstown. And I live in Columbus now, but I've been working in political and community organizing for over the past decade. And yeah, just really excited to be here and really looking to transform some cities throughout Ohio.
Great, thanks, Mark. Well, let's go ahead and transition right in. I'll hand the mic over here to Andrew. Like I said, Clean Fuels Ohio, as a quick introduction, has incredible expertise around electric vehicle adoption, clean transportation, advanced transportation options for cities to consider. They've worked with a number of communities all across Ohio. They're currently serving PCFO communities to help them do fleet assessments to think about how they can transition their fleets to adopt more electric vehicles and make efficiency upgrades. And so want to also share that out and make sure if folks have questions on that, we can certainly share the last presentation where they talk through what that exactly looks like. But today we're talking about EV infrastructure, EV supply equipment. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Andrew, and spotlight you, and feel free to share your screen and go from there.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks to all the attendees today. Glad to be talking with you. Really, as Joe said, we're providing a range of services. So today we're really focused on charging stations for the community, meaning the motorists who travel, the citizens who travel throughout the communities. As Joe mentioned, we are working with a number of PCFO members on fleet planning for like the city municipal fleets themselves, and we can touch on that a little more today, as well as this deeper dive into charging stations for motorists. So with that, just to touch base on the agenda, I'll give folks a little more background on who Clean Fuels Ohio is, what we do, and how we can help. We'll touch base on the EVSE market and options. So the technical jargon here is electric vehicle supply equipment. That's what charging stations are called. So you'll hear EVSE a bunch on this webinar, and what we are referring to is the charging stations in the ground that you see and plug your vehicle into. Touch base on some of the options that are in the market today. Touch base on a planning framework to get you oriented in terms of how do you think about this, who needs what, where, and why. Then talk about some siting best practices once you know hey, we want it in this lot. How do you figure out which spot and location and hardware? Talk about operations and maintenance. Once you've got it in the ground, how are you going to operate it? Are you going to charge people for it? How are you going to maintain it? And then touch base on some grants and incentives that are either available now or coming down the pipe for these types of equipment. And then happy to preserve some time for Q&A at the end and some discussion. This as Zoom, I'm going to try to run through it all in one shot. So that way it can be a coherent presentation for anyone who wants to view the recording. And then you can feel free to chat throughout this time into the chat, and our team members will be monitoring that, and we can circle to any of your questions at the tail end and answer those in order. So that's what we've got for you today, and we'll keep it to diving into these topics. So Clean Fuels Ohio, we are a 501c3 mission-based nonprofit. We're solely focused on the transportation sector, and our goal is to make Ohio a cleaner and more prosperous state by focusing on efficiency technologies and alternative fuels, essentially anything that makes the transportation sector, particularly vehicles running on the road, more efficient, cleaner, and more cost effective for motorists and for fleets. We are fuel and technology inclusive. We work across the whole portfolio of alternative fuels and efficiency solutions. We have a specific program dedicated to electric vehicles called Drive Electric Ohio. Really focuses on 7 key pillars. We have grassroots consumer education. So we have chapters all throughout the state of owner ambassadors who in non-COVID times, we're doing ride and drives like the one you see pictured in the background. We do engage local, state, and federal policymakers on education about, on the local level, codes, zoning, permitting, a number of things that, can be updated or improved upon based on, the existing codes are really structured only for gas and diesel vehicles. And so there's ways that they don't account for some of the ins and outs of electric vehicles. And that's an area that we work on. We work and engage the utilities, both the investor-owned co-ops and municipal utilities. We do fleet electrification, which I'll touch on in a second, EVSE infrastructure development, which is the sole focus of our time together today. And we do dealer engagement and manufacturing engagement to get more vehicles available here in Ohio and dealers to be better trained and aware of how they can help consumers, whether fleets or motorists, get those vehicles. And then woven throughout our work is efforts to ensure equity and access so that these technology solutions and their benefits are applicable to all. So for our Clean Future Ohio, we are a resource, a technical resource for the leading communities. And particularly, as Joe mentioned, we are standing at the ready to do fleet analysis and planning. So that includes data gathering on the municipal fleet, establishing some baseline performance indicators and goals, evaluating the available EV and infrastructure options that work for your goals and your budget and your criteria in terms of operations, decision-making tools so you can select from the variety of options that are available, and some strategic planning and recommendations of, you're going to replace these 5 vehicles next year and these 3 of them can be electrified most cost effectively, kind of strategic recommendations. And so you can contact me for analysis results, but also Brandon Jones is on the line from Clean Fuels Ohio. He is working closely and leading this effort on our team to directly work with folks. So we are working with 5 of the PCFO communities on this and are happy to work with all the rest. So please contact us if you're interested in that fleet side analysis. But in terms of today, we're really talking about the charging station, the EVSE planning and assistance, and again, for residents, citizens, motorists. So a little different flavor and way to look at it because of those user groups and their needs versus what we would do for your fleet. Your fleet is behind the fence, you have control, there isn't public facing user groups. So fleets usually categorized in one bucket, and then motorist charging is in another category, which is what we're focused on today. And so, Clean Fuels Ohio works on all fronts. We've helped with project development, with accessing funding, with selection of hardware, and assistance in getting in contact with providers, whether sharing RFPs or sourcing quotes and things like that. We've helped once it's installed with pricing and use policies, with training, as well as we've done promotional events with cities, to let the residents know that their charging station is up in line and ready for the motorists to use. So, there's a whole cycle of things we can do to assist PCFO members on this front, and would be happy to, follow up with people in more detail if there's specific needs. But the goal today is really to help you understand kind of the big picture context of where does your municipality's needs fit in the larger market and planning framework, so you can really hone in on the priority investments and key locations for your specific locales. So in terms of the market, I just want to touch base real briefly on the market for electric vehicles in general to give you a context of why it's important to care about this today. So the market is growing extensively and significantly, and what's driving it? Well, there's all sorts of forecasts and studies. One that I'm just going to draw from for my brief framework here is the Bloomberg New Energy Fund's electric vehicle outlook for 2020. They have yet to publish their 2021 outlook, but this framework is still a really good for our purposes. So in terms of what's driving the market, we have big companies like GM investing in the LG Chem battery plant in Lordstown. We have, GM as well saying that they're going to electrify all their vehicle platforms, but you see a whole host of vehicles coming into the market and investments from major companies globally and domestically. You also see policy. We see the Biden administration saying they want to electrify the federal fleet and have policies through EPA, Department of Energy and Transportation to fund zero emission vehicles and infrastructure. We've got technology. There's been great strides and advancements in battery technology and electric vehicle technology that's really helping push the market forward. And then we've got the economics. We've got prices falling, range increasing, and price parity projected in this decade. And so to drill into that specifically, that to me is the biggest needle mover. So lithium-ion batteries are the biggest price of vehicles. They've fallen 87% in the past decade, and to just over $150 a kilowatt hour on average. And so most analysts are projecting when battery prices fall below $100 a kilowatt sometime mid this decade, we'll really see, especially for light duty vehicles, full price parity, meaning you won't have to pay any more for an electric versus a conventional. And when that happens, there's a lot of cascading benefits for motorists and fleets in terms of savings on fuel, savings on maintenance, and so forth, that are really going to drive the market to increased adoption. And so what does that mean? According to Bloomberg, that means right now we're seeing about 2.7% of new vehicles electric, but that's going way up over the decade, as we're saying. So by 2025, 10% of new vehicle purchases will be electric. By 2030, 28%. So the market is really projecting that there's going to be increased and significant increases in adoption, where almost 1 in 3 new vehicles by 2030 will be electric vehicles. So that means there's going to be a lot of them in your community over the next decade. So that's where the charger conversation comes in. If these are coming, how do we prepare for it? How do we build for it? How do we make sure your residents and other motorists that are going to visit your communities can be best served through charging infrastructure? So real quick on the context, there's essentially 3 levels of charging. There's level 1, which you can see here is the standard 120 volt wall outlet. That's going to add 5 miles of range per hour on average. So it's really slow. You mainly see that for residential folks who are going to charge their car in their garage. 240 volt level 2, you can see if you're going to do this in your garage, it's going to look like the standard kind of washer dryer 240 volt outlet that many of you have seen in your home. So it's a pretty standard kind of outlet that a electrician can install. But these are what you see commercially. If you've pulled up to a shopping center that's had pedestal chargers with the ports on the cords, it's been a 240 volt charger that you see in those instances. And then the third level is fast charging, which takes 480 volt 3-phase power, which is essentially a commercial or industrial level of power to a site. Right now, a fast charger is anything from 50 kilowatts an hour and up, but we're already seeing 350 kilowatt chargers. That's 350 kilowatts per hour. So we're seeing those in other places around the country. So what we're seeing is fast charging. Those 50 kilowatts is kind of the floor, up to super fast and ultra fast charging. So that's going to change and evolve as batteries scale in size and more vehicles become available, like electric refuse trucks and things that need a lot of power and to get it quick. So in terms of how to think about this, just to clarify even further, the level 2 that many of you may have seen in the community, again, those are these pedestal mounted chargers. You have a whole range. There's literally hundreds of options in the marketplace right now in terms of the hardware, and it ranges in cost. What you usually see is these are networked, as in they either have cell service or connected directly hardwired to the internet for public use. They're networked because then they have a touch screen, they can accept payment. So it's really a whole range of costs from pretty low, 4,000 or even less, up beyond 15,000, depending on how many plugs, how many bells and whistles in the touch screen and options you want. But networking is really, and that interface is what we see for most motorist public-facing chargers, so that you as the owner, if you choose to own it, have all the admin options, and customers or users have all the payment and accessibility and registration options. In terms of fast charging, they look very similar, but they're dispensing a much higher level of power. Again, it's 3-phase 40 volt power, minimum 50 kilowatts an hour. So that's in 1 hour, probably much more than the average house would use in a month, if you look at your utility bill. So these are pretty high volt chargers, and they're accordingly much more expensive. So you can see we had like 4,000 to 7,000 in the last slide. We have more like 30,000 to 50,000 when you're looking at these, and then it scales up with higher power draws. So just wanted to give you a feel of the range of options that are out there, and we're getting even more innovative options as well in the market every day. So the level 2 and fast chargers are the two biggest buckets that you're going to look at when planning for your community. We're seeing a whole range of other things. We're seeing portable chargers. So this unit, for instance, is just one of a number of portable chargers coming into market. You can see it actually has these bigger lithium ion battery packs, and you can decide how many you want to stack on. So, you see uses for fleets who, in case of somebody didn't charge their vehicle right and it dies out in service, you can just quickly top it off like you would just run out with a gas can. Or you see this for multi-unit residential dwellings or other sites where it might not make sense to bolt it to a single parking spot. You may want to move it from resident to resident or something like that. We're also seeing wall-mounted DC fast chargers for specific applications, as well as battery integrated charging. So this unit, for example, has some big batteries inside it. You can connect it to a 240 volt standard power service, which even your residential house has that. It'll fill up the batteries using that lower level of power, but then dispense it at a fast charger level of power. So we're really, without going too far into the weeds, what I want to illustrate is beyond just level 2 and fast charging, there's a variety of innovative options coming into the market. So you don't need to be pigeonholed into just an either or here, depending on what your actual needs and use case are. So, okay, so there's all these options in the market. How do we think about where and when and why to deploy specific ones? And so I want to talk through some planning framework real quick. And the biggest concept for the planning framework is essentially, where is it and who's going to use it. And so at that, the answers to those questions determine the answers to what you're going to need, obviously. But so really, we talked about level 2 and fast charging, but what are the locations? Well, there's, this pyramid of needs from the top, opportunity charging at retail locations and corridors, to destination charging like workplaces, to fleet and residential charging. And really, this pyramid is both visually designed to indicate that right now what we're seeing is more than 80% of motorists and fleets are charging at their home base, whether that's their residential area or their fleet depot. And so when we're looking at siting community charging, the big takeaway I want everyone to think about here is that, look at this pyramid, the tip of it, the smallest part, is actually the kinds of sites we're going to be talking about, both the local destinations, the retail destinations, the arteries and corridors. So there are definite needs here, but you don't have to solve all the problems for all the motorists. It's really being strategic and picking the sites that are going to do the most benefit for the most motorists, while realizing that, you look at the bottom third of that pyramid, most motorists are going to actually be charging either at workplace or fleet or residential home bases. So with that framework in mind, there's really 3 levels that we like to think about it in Ohio. You have the state framework, which is primarily the interstate corridors, the US routes, the state routes. Where are people traveling at distance? That's really what the state needs to think about, and some key destinations like state parks and things that the state really helps work with, and people dwell at longer than those quick trip charges. At the regional level, even if we fill in all the gaps so you can get from Columbus to Cleveland, well, once you get to Cleveland, you need to get around the greater Cleveland metro area. So there needs to be a regional plan so that once you get to that region, you can still travel efficiently around that region. And then obviously, not just on the regional level, there needs to be a local plan for your specific city to make sure motorists can effectively travel, with their just daily commute for work and so on and so forth. So at the state level, there's already a plan in place that was published summer last year around state level corridor priority needs and destination needs. And so you can Google right now the ODOT electric vehicle charging study, and this will come right up. You'll see Clean Fuels Ohio was part of the development and writing of this. So this isn't the be all end all. It's not designed to describe every possible location that the state could fund, but really to say the state's goal is to identify the sites that we've mentioned on the corridors to really fill in those gaps so you can travel throughout the state. On the regional level, again, really the MPOs, your metropolitan planning organization, your councils of governments, they're going to be your best partners. And like literally what's pictured here on the right is NOACA's charging plan for the 4-county region up there, 5-county region with Cuyahoga at its center. Before you go too far with just your local plan, my recommendation is to reach out to your local MPO and see how they're thinking about this, and make sure you're not reinventing the wheel, that you're piggybacking off of any thinking that they're doing in coordination with the state and the overall region. So you're really able to hone in on the further gaps that makes the most sense for your local planning to fill in. And then that's where you really come in as a municipality to say, okay, now that we have a sense of where the state's trying to go and where the region's needs are, how do we pick up our piece of this puzzle and really fill in that gap for our municipal area to really facilitate motorists and so forth. So what does that actually mean in practice? What kind of sites are we talking about for each of these levels? Because there may be a corridor gap, like a statewide corridor gap. You might have an exit from the highway right to your municipality. So you might actually be a state level corridor target to fill in. So really, you could have some layer of all three of these at your local community and would want to be coordinating and thinking about them in those ways, and at least would be our recommendation. So are you a good site host? What do you need to think through for the site? So obviously as municipalities, you own property, whether that be city hall or public parks or other locations that people are going to travel to or travel through. So are you a good site host? Really, you need to think through how many people are coming there. If this is a depot off the beaten path that nobody really drives by, not a great spot. But if it's a spot that people are either heavy traffic is driving by or people come to frequently, then you're probably a great spot. How long do they stay? If they, are in and out in 20 minutes, then you don't, want to have one of these slower level 2 chargers. It's just not going to make sense. So it really, how long they stay, or dwell time, as the industry likes to talk about it, is going to determine what type of hardware is really needed. How far do they travel? Is this the local park and really only local people are coming, or is this a state park that people are driving across the state to come to on a regular basis? And what's there right now? How much is this going to cost? And really it all boils down to how much power is available at the site now. Because if it's only 240 volt, you may not want to do all the upgrades that are required to get the power available for the fastest kind of charger. Or maybe you already have that and it makes a lot of sense. And then, we'll come back to this and focus on a couple other details to think through. But these are the big picture questions. And so again, even as a municipality, you may have a corridor location. Sites just like this are at Walmarts and different things, like even that are just right there off the side of the road. There may be ways to work on public-private partnerships, but even your local municipal park or something that is just right off the highway could be a good spot for one of these corridor chargers if you have high traffic and access to the highway. So it needs to be right off the highway. Just like if you've traveled on a road trip, you might want that particular restaurant, but oh man, it's 3-5 miles in that direction. I don't have that much that I want to go that far off the highway. So it needs to be right off the highway. It needs to be highly visible. So once you get off the highway, it's accessible, so even if there's a park right off the highway, if you got to weave your way around through that lot to find it way in the back, then that you're probably going to miss a lot of people from that. It needs to have good consumer amenities. I've used this park example, like if it's back in the back of a park and it really has nothing but a charging station, people aren't going to want to use it because they're going to want to, use a restroom, grab a vending machine or some, drinks, or go shopping, have something to do when they charge there. Even if it's just for a 20-minute fast charge to get back filled up and on the road, they're going to need something to do, and have obviously good power supply if you're doing the fast charging. Obviously it needs to be safe as well, well lit and accessible. So that's for interstate travel, off the highway, off the state route, US route. But then you might also be a key node on a regional route, because commuters are going from your city to a bigger city, or from a smaller city to your city. So these are primarily for local users doing that local regional travel, but it can also support other use cases like taxis and Uber and Lyft and other things that are running around the local region, delivery, that kind of stuff. So there may be a need for those kind of faster chargers even in the region. So very similar to corridor sites, you want all those same kind of amenities and things. Retail amenities are still the most desirable. Again, you want high traffic. Like these are not inexpensive. Just the hardware alone could be $50,000. You might need to upgrade the power. So if you're going to do one of these, you want to ensure that there's going to be real users, and it's accessible and so forth. So again, I'm focusing on the different use cases for fast charging. Again, locally, you might need a fast charger for fleets or transportation services. For multi-unit dwelling residents, often it's hard since you're renting You know, it's hard to, everybody's got assigned spaces and so forth. It can be tricky to site a charger in a multi-unit dwelling, like an apartment building or something. And so having a nearby fast charger could allow for the residents to get their electric vehicle and charge it up quick on the way to and from work or shopping and so forth. And then locally, you know, you want to draw people from outside your city into your city to shop and spend money and to, you know, recreate in your city, as well as you want your residents to be able to charge up quickly if they need it. So those were all fast charging sites that could pertain to how your local municipal area may weave into state corridors or regional corridors, or even just for local users need some fast charging. But by far the most use case for charging locally is for level 2 sites, which are really spec'd for destinations like parking garages, retail locations, parks, movie theaters, etc. You know, you're really looking at, okay, you're going to come there, you're going to stay at least an hour. So in most local trips, you know, you're not going to travel too many miles. It's not like you're going to travel 50 miles even locally. You're probably going to travel, you know, 10, a dozen, couple dozen miles. Then you dwell for an hour or two. You can get most of that trip's energy back to go back to home or where you came from. So really, these are looking for these kind of centers where you're going to dwell. You're going to stay there for over an hour. So these are the sites that are most readily available for municipal planners to think through. And, you know, even the state house, the, you know, courthouse, the public parks, you know, you have a lot of these kind of sites. A lot of municipal areas have, you know, their, you know, municipal downtown that has shopping and restaurants, and there'll even be a publicly owned parking place there. That can be a great place to put these kind of level 2 chargers. So why are we seeing most people install these? You know, these are relatively cost effective, and they're a way to build goodwill and loyalty, attract new customers, and even for municipalities, that might just be attracting people to your downtown shopping district. Retain existing customers, as you know, 30% of new vehicle purchases go electric. You don't want people to be like, well, we don't want to go downtown because there's nowhere for us to charge there. And then increase revenues. You know, you can actually charge for the service of charging, so you can actually make revenue off of these if you so choose, and to respond to the demand of consumers. So again, what are you looking for in the sites? You really need to determine, where is the site? Is it in a garage? Is it an open surface lot? Is it, you know, in the public right of way, like what a parking meter would be? That's going to really determine some of the considerations. You know, like we're picturing one in a parking garage. This one had an electric panel right up, so you just run that conduit right along the wall. You don't have to trench, you don't have to do anything, bolt it to the wall. Or you might have to go out into the parking lot, or, you know, the right of way. There's different challenges depending on, or different costs depending on the location. And those different sites and different challenges, as I just described them, but, you know, everything's solvable, but they will relate to how much cost is involved depending on how far you have to go from the power source, how much cutting into the concrete and trenching and those kind of things that are going to be required. And so that really depends on how close or far it is from the building or the power source, what the available power supply is, both to the site and to the panel itself. So just like we have in our homes, an electric panel with a breaker box and different things, you know, you have to have the ability to actually be able to plug in there. Everything's upgradable, but the best case is you don't have to upgrade anything and you can just plug it all in. And then new versus existing facility. There's a growing body of evidence and best practices that if you are building a new facility, that is the best time to essentially pre-plumb and prepare for this. You're going to save a huge amount of cost. Some studies have shown upwards of 50 to 70% cost reduction based on being able to spec the electric supply to that site, spec the conduit, the panel, all the things that you're going to need, have it built in beforehand so you're not cutting into existing stuff and retrofitting. And so really, you're looking at those installation costs. You're looking at the upgrades that you may need to the site to make it ready. Any certified electrical contractor can perform this work, even for the fast charging, although we would highly recommend partners that are experienced with this, just for the best practice. There will be some permits required and more if you're going faster charging. And then, there's wider variety of needs in terms of signage, wayfinding, security, and so forth to get it installed. So I mentioned you're going to want to work with a provider. The best practice is going to be to work with a provider that has done this before. So there are both the providers of the hardware itself. So these are two of the biggest companies, ChargePoint and Greenlots. They actually make the stations. They actually will sell you even packages of networking service. So that's kind of a whole cloth piece of here's the charger, here's the software, here's the networking. So you can have a pass for users to use it and an easy payment model. But then there's a whole host, and there's hundreds of companies, several for every letter of the alphabet at this point. That you can get that make charging stations. There's also companies like this. These are both Ohio-based companies, EV United and Electrata, that are like turnkey services. They'll help you assess your site requirements as they are now and what upgrades you need. They'll help you assess what charging equipment options. Once you select, they'll actually are distributors of hardware and can bring that to the project. They can help with the installation, have electrical contractors on staff, and Electrata itself also has an additional set of services to help with the pricing and user fee models there. So there's just a huge variety. You can do it a la carte. You can select everything yourself. You can use your own facilities folks, electrical contractors, or you can get someone to pretty much take it and do it turnkey for you. So once you own it, once it's installed, once you found your best site, now you got to operate and maintain it. So in terms of operating costs, your utility can help you work through this. It really just boils down to what's your current charges now for your site, for that particular rec center, park, what have you. So there will be a customer service focused personnel at your utility who can help you with this. You're going to want to get your cost per kilowatt hour, and you're really going to want to assess these pieces that you see here on the bill calculation left-hand side, demand charge and peak charges. So a lot of utility bills, you might be charged 7 cents per kilowatt hour, but they've decided that since this is, a park that just has a shelter house, it never uses over 50 kilowatts a month. So as long as you stay under 50 kilowatts a month, you're good. But for every 5 kilowatts over that, you're going to be charged $4 per kilowatt or something like that. So there's demand charges that can be bundled in. There's also peak charges, during the summer between noon to 5, it's going to go from 7 cents to 12 cents because we don't want everybody charging or using electricity at that peak demand for air conditioning and things. So these are the two variables that can pretty significantly impact the cost of operating your charging station. So for example, let's pretend you don't have demand or peak charges. Then it's a pretty simple calculation, and your utility rep can help you work through it in terms of, hey, I've got a level 2 charger that dispenses 10 kilowatts an hour. I think it's going to use 100 kilowatts a day for this many kilowatts a month. You can really just figure out, okay, it's going to be $300 a month if I have that consistent stream of users. However, if you're putting in especially a fast charger, that's where the peak and demand charges can really come into play. If you're like that example I used of a park where you're not going to use 50 kilowatts in a month, and all of a sudden you put in a 50 kilowatt charger and a Tesla pulls up and takes 50 kilowatts in an hour, you've just gone over your monthly limit, hour one of day one of that month. And so by the end of the month, you could be racking up thousands of dollars of excess demand charges because instead of being charged 7 cents, you're being charged $4 a kilowatt for everyone over that. So it's really important to assess if you have those charges, particularly at sites where you're looking to install fast charging. And same thing with those peak charges. You're going to want to see, oh, does my rate double at these key times during the summer? I'm going to factor that in. It's not just a simple $300. It's actually going to be, $600, $900 because of, it's a park and we expect the bulk of the use to be during those summer hours or something like that. But it's not rocket science as much as just understanding those three categories. What are you being charged per kilowatt? Do you have peak charges? Do you have demand charges? And that way you're going to ensure there's no hidden costs that are going to catch you off guard after installation. We really recommend you look at this ahead of time to really decide, whoop, we were going to put a fast charger here, but we have some big demand charges. And so we've decided that doesn't make sense anymore. And then there's a whole bunch of different payment and pricing models. To save a little more time, I'm just going to kind of highlight a couple things and not go through these one by one. So, corridors, you're really looking at people who are charging at high speed, high power, and you're going to want to charge for it ultimately. If you have a fast charger, it's probably never going to make sense based on how much energy is being dispensed to make that a free amenity. So just real-time transparent pricing, you can in Ohio, under the Ohio Department of Agricultural rules that govern these kind of methods of sale, you can charge by hour, just like, hey, it's $1 an hour. You can charge by kilowatt hour, it's 10 cents per kilowatt hour that you're dispensing, or you can charge any kind of fixed fee or hybrid of any two or three of those. So you could say it's $1 for to turn it on, and it's 10 cents a kilowatt after that. And so once you know your utility bill charges and expectations, then you can really back into this with some simple math to say, hey, if we think this is going to cost $1,000 a month and we're going to have 100 users, then let's charge $1 per every time someone plugs in, and an extra 5 cents per kilowatt to make up some of the costs that it's going to take for the maintenance of the facility or the station. So different payment options for different models really make sense, because in that corridor charging, you really only have people getting 20, 30, 40-minute hits, filling up, getting on their way. So you're going to want to charge accordingly. Charging by hour doesn't make sense if most users aren't even going to charge for the hour. Same thing with urban or regional fast charging. Likely shouldn't be free, and it could be price sensitive. With the network chargers, you can whitelist users. You can say, if you're just John or Jane Q Public, it's this rate. If you're a fleet, it's this rate. If you're the city's vehicles, you're whitelisted and it's free. There's all kinds of things that you can do there. And then for local level 2, right now today, most of these we see are free, although increasingly people are starting to charge for them. So it's really about what you're trying to do. Are you just trying to provide it as an amenity? Do you want to recoup just your raw costs, or are you trying to make a little revenue? There's not free gas everywhere you park, so it is reasonable to expect people to pay for the energy that they're going to drive with. So it really just depends what you're trying to do with your station. And then maintenance. By and large, these level 2 chargers are really just plugs. They're just glorified plugs with a touch screen, so it's a more user accessible and stuff. So there's almost no maintenance on the level 2 unless there's an issue like someone literally jumps the curve and runs it over, or with EVs, you don't really even have to worry about people driving off with it plugged in, because the vehicle and the charger are smart enough to not let you engage into drive while the thing's plugged in. So unless you have, some folks who've come by and like intentionally vandalized it or accidentally crashed into it, there's pretty much no maintenance on the level 2 hardware, and most manufacturers are speccing them for a 10-year life cycle. The fast chargers, though, because they're putting so much energy through, actually do have some maintenance. Largely, they have cooling systems inside them. So, putting 50 kilowatts of energy, basically a month's worth of your home's energy through in an hour, that gets pretty hot. And so they have cooling systems in them that need to be maintained and so forth. So there's some best practices there, but some of these folks, even like EV United and Electrata, who I mentioned, you can purchase maintenance packages from them and they'll gladly do it for you. So just real briefly as we wrap up here, incentive programs. The feds do have a tax credit right now, covers 30% of the cost up to $30,000 of electric vehicle stations. There's also one for residential units. Ohio has the Ohio VW program. In March, they just announced their awards for level 2 stations. They are going to release DC fast charging funding. We don't know all the details of this, but we do know they're going to be looking for publicly available, so pretty much everything we've been talking about, sites that fill in gaps in the state's corridors. They're going to want it to be networked, and it's going to need to be minimally a 50 kilowatt hour charger. So what our understanding is from the EPA is they're likely to release a draft of their RFP late spring, early summer for public comment to make sure it makes sense and they're not going to have, folks like you on the call jump through too many hoops that aren't relevant or too onerous, and then likely release the funding full RFP in the fall, late summer or fall. They are also going to release a pilot program, $3 million. So the charging is going to be $7 million for fast charging, and the school bus program, they're going to have a school bus pilot program for $3 million. So something to think through. These are only for fleets in the 26 counties in Ohio that are not meeting federal air quality standards. So that is going to be location dependent as well. The MPOs you're all familiar with have CMAQ attributable funding. I'm just picturing MORPC's webpage right here. There are ways CMAQ funding is fully eligible to be spent on charging infrastructure. And, NOACA is going to issue a $3 million RFP for fast charging in level 2 based on that map that I was showing earlier using CMAQ funding. So it never hurts to start talking to your MPO partners about what kind of CMAQ funding can be available. And if you're a municipality that's only planning, a half dozen or a dozen of these, that probably doesn't rise to the threshold of enough money to be a CMAQ project in reality. So what we've seen as a possible best practice is for regional partners, all the cities on the east side of Columbus could join together and say, with a half a dozen in each of these communities, we're getting to $1 million spend. And what we're really going to do is have a network throughout the whole east side of Franklin County. So there's ways to get creative and combine with your peers throughout a region to go for, a bigger dollar spend that might reach the threshold of better eligibility and competitiveness for CMAQ dollars. And then AEP, Duke, and First Energy all have rate cases, or AEP, Duke, and DPL all have rate cases before the PUCO to invest in this kind of infrastructure, but funds have not yet been, settled or decided by the PUCO, but there could be more funding coming from the utilities. So again, we're happy to assist with the full life cycle here and make further connections and provide guidance and resources. And, we're here also to work with the PCFO fleets on fleet planning. So I'll stop there and happy to address some of the questions that have come through in the chat. Joe or anyone, if you've seen some of those questions, I'll start opening it up myself to look at what we've got. But thanks for your time. Happy to answer questions or follow up with you on more details. Looks like we don't have questions in the chat that I see, unless anyone else sees any. So feel free. I think everybody can essentially unmute themselves and ask verbal questions too, if you want to jump in with any questions. I know that was a whole lot to digest. Really wanted to frame up kind of how to think through this. This is not designed to be kind of a pop quiz or to assume you're going to digest all this information, but really to start thinking about how to think about it, how to orient yourself within the whole universe of charging. And we're certainly here as a resource, as you know, if this has been food for thought, if there's a point that makes sense to circle back with an internal team and talk with them more about what might be the needs and the best solutions for each municipal partner.
I've got a question that may be a little stupid, but it's just something I'm a little curious about. I've seen Tesla charging stations like in Easton or in like Cambridge, Ohio, and I always, I've always been curious, like, are electric like charging ports on each car the same?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I could share a graphic out, but essentially you have a standard now that most vehicles are going towards, except the Tesla. You can kind of think of the Tesla like the iPhone charger and everybody else like the micro USB, if you will. Generally speaking, though, any one of those, like Tesla owners, for example, it's a proprietary port. The actual like pin configuration looks different than most other chargers. Teslas come with an optional adapter, so you can just plug that adapter in and then plug it into the the more universal standard port, and vice versa. Tesla has largely, in Europe, they've been legally obligated to have an adapter at their Tesla charging stations. That's not how America has gone so far. So really, you can only charge a Tesla at a Tesla charging station. But in most other cases, if a vehicle has a proprietary plug in the vehicle itself, it comes with an adapter for the more universal charging stations.
Okay. And are there any modern electric vehicles that can't actually plug into like the high capacity battery chargers?
Yeah, great questions, Mark. And for future presentations, I should probably add both of those. So these are not stupid questions as you frame them. They're right on the money. Yes is the short answer, especially early generation vehicles. Some vehicles are not spec'd from the manufacturer for fast charging. So some of the earlier generations of Nissan Leaf, for example, but are not just off the factory line ready for fast charging. So the motorists themselves will know that, the vehicle will know that, and a lot of the if we got really deep into the weeds, there's actually proprietary software on each vehicle that communicates with the charger and says, our Nissan Leaf team decided we like, even if it's a 10 kilowatt hour charger, we want you to trickle in 2 kilowatts for the first 10 minutes and then ramp it up quick and then ramp it down smoothly. So there's actually like some pretty complex communications between the vehicles and chargers. So we're fortunately in an era where everything's networked and connected, so the chargers and vehicles can basically communicate with each other. And even if you plug into one that is just a non-starter, you'll get those kind of messages from either the vehicle or the charger. So that's broadly speaking. It's a little oversimplification how I just framed it, but that's broadly speaking how that will work. But as we go forward, what we're seeing is faster and faster chargers and vehicles off the factory line designed to accept faster and faster charging.
Thank you.
Andrew, Tom Carroll here. I typed a question in the chat, but I'll just ask it verbally. You had mentioned some cars, to Mark's question, some cars are not capable of a level 3 charge. I bought a 2020 Nissan Leaf. I want to make sure I can do a level 3 charging. Is that capable of receiving a rapid charge?
Yeah, I believe the short answer is actually Nissan, at least so I work mostly with fleets actually in my day-to-day work. And I know for sure for the fleet vehicles that have been purchased, it's actually when you purchase the vehicle, you can purchase a lesser price vehicle that's not fast charge equipped, or, as an option like leather seats, pick, I want fast charging capability and make sure that box is checked. So For the Nissan Leafs, like the 2017, 18, 19, there were options to choose to upgrade into fast charging. So not sure which one you might have.
It's very disappointing. It sounds like I'm gonna have to read the owner's manual, Andrew. That's
I'm sorry.
it's horrible answer.
Yeah.
I was counting on you.
Sorry, I can't tell you off the top of my head. But you have some light reading for bedtime tonight, it sounds like, so it's not all bad.
Well, I know we're about 2 minutes out here before we get to the top of the hour, so I want to go ahead and bring us back. And if you have any specific questions or follow-up, I know certainly as we start to think about the potential for the Volkswagen grant for EV infrastructure that's upcoming, I know as PCFO communities, you have access to Andrew, Hallie, and the whole Brandon and the whole Clean Fuels Ohio team to talk to them, answer any of your questions about those types of things. We want to be a resource for you as you think through a potential application for that. So I wanted to make sure, to emphasize that as we close out. And Andrew, is there anything else you want to add before we just make some final announcements?
Just to piggyback off that, I mean, level 2 chargers are pretty easy. Most of the time you'll be able to find that your site has the power, that you can find a panel that could accept a 240 volt unit or 208 volt unit. So the kind of planning needed for those isn't too heavy of a lift. If you're talking about that VW fast charging funding and you want to make an application of that, then I'd really encourage folks to get with our team or get with others and start planning for that today, because you're going to want to make sure that a number of boxes are checked so that you don't run into a site that seems to make sense on paper, but then doesn't have the power, has some costly upgrades, or has demand charges that are going to be a snag later on down the road. So that when that does come out, you can just apply, right away without running into some of those traps in the process.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And I'll just emphasize that Clean Fuels Ohio can help you read the tea leaves on what they're looking for in this grant program. So it's, taking it to that next level, the deeper dive of understanding, well, what is a really good application? What does it look like? What's the right site? So as you're thinking about that, please reach out to them. It's 3 o'clock now, so I just want to kick it over briefly to Melanie Nutter, our technical team lead, to cover kind of what comes next for our policy webinar series, and then we'll wrap up.
Great, thanks, Joe, and thanks so much, Andrew, for the great presentation. So wanted to let you all know that the next webinar for PCFO cities is going to be on Thursday, April 29th, so it's a month from today. Also at 3 p.m. And we're going to shift gears from electric vehicles and fleets to energy efficiency. So there'll be a presentation from Tara Brown, who is our technical assistant partner at the Institute for Market Transformation. They're a national organization that has been doing a lot of the work with cities on energy efficiency benchmarking policies, as well as how to benchmark your buildings. So she's going to be doing an introductory webinar on benchmarking and looking specifically at energy efficiency, and also answering questions about policy development for benchmarking as well. So hopefully you can make it. Please mark your calendars, and we'd love to see you all there.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. And thank you all for attending today. I did drop in the chat to save the date for the Ohio Clean Energy Summit. So hope you all can attend that it's a virtual summit that will take place on May 20th. So thanks again, Andrew, and the whole Clean Fuels Ohio team for this presentation. We will share out the recording and the presentation soon as a follow-up. But thank you all for attending, and we'll talk again soon.